Should we get started, everyone? It's nice to see Does everybody have a handout? Let's make sure that you can't come to the movies without your program. You got a program? Everyone got your handout? Coffee's over there. Welcome. Welcome to the summer, everyone. Welcome to the getting ready for the end of the summer. A couple quick announcements you should know. The first is that next week, Rabbi Feinstein will be hosting this series next week, and the screening at 7 o'clock on Tuesday night will be of the Frisco Kid. So if you like a little lighthearted affair compared to what we're talking about tonight, and on Thursday night, just like I'm doing tonight at 7:30, Rabbi Feinstein will be talking about the Frisco Kid. Now, I can't tell you what he's going to say, but it'll be something like that. So that is the plan for next week. A couple of other announcements that are really important. The first is that if you have not decided to join us yet for membership this coming year, we invite your membership. The High Holidays is 6 weeks away, so it is an opportunity, please, to join us and to be part of this community. We'd love to have you. If you've joined somewhere else, that's wonderful too, but we'd love to have you with us. A quick thank you just ahead of this to Louis Spitzer, who is always our consummate volunteer before we get started. And so let's talk about the Godfather, shall we? So before we do that, let's talk about King David. So what do you know about King David? What's the song? David Melech Israel. All right. Chai Chai Vikaya. Who is King David? Who is King David in your mind, in the mind that you got in Hebrew school or day school growing up? Who is King David supposed to be? Yes. He is Israel's greatest king. He is God's chosen king, the king Messiah even, right? And if you ever went to religious school or rabbinic school or day school or Hebrew high school, King David could do no wrong. He was perfect. Yes, Diane.
When he did those two terrible things.
Oh, he did many more than just two terrible things. I want you to think about, though, the image of David. I mean, think about it. What do? We sing David Melech Yisrael, and we do all the hand things, right? Right? And then when we pray about David in our liturgy, what do we usually say? We usually say, rebuild the temple, rebuild Jerusalem, bring the Zion of David back to us. We are, those are all the things that are central to Jewish religion and in fact, Christian religion based a lot of the Jesus-type characters on David, right? So here it is King David. What else do we know about King David?
In our days, but in a secular school, we studied about David, but and we were told and we studied and we analyzed all the bad things he did.
Good.
And also, it's very interesting that the Bible was written by people from Yehuda, and it was a...
I'll repeat.
Okay, and because it was written by the people from Yehuda, then the whole, after Israel was split into Israel and Yehuda, they depicted the Israeli kings and the Israeli regime as the bad, which is not always the right.
Okay, good. So what she's saying is that in Israel, where she had I'm going to put secular, really it means chiloni, education, where they learned sifrut, they learned the Bible as literature, mostly. They learned about the good and the bad that David had, as probably as well as Solomon, and that even how the kings talked about each other when the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom were split and the civil war between them, that they were not afraid of showing the dark side. In fact, if you wanted to watch Game of Thrones, anyone not know what Game of Thrones is, you just have to open up the book of Kings and the book of 2 Kings, and you can read your own version of the Game of Thrones right there in the Bible, because it's quite chilling, some of the things that happen to grab for power. King David has always been, in the rabbinic mind, a positive white hat type of character. King David represents the best of us. King David represents the lost king who's supposed to come back again and bring us into the future when everyone will hold hands and make world peace. King David represents the many of the ideas of regal and crownship, the idea of kingship that we associate with God, we've associated with King David. He was a warrior, he was a politician, he loved people, he was a poet. 120 of the 150 Psalms are supposed to be attributed to King David. In fact, they used to say in the Midrash that King David would wake up at midnight because he would take his lyre, his harp, and put it in the window, and a special breeze from God would come in, and the way God would blow the wind through the harp or the lyre would play a cadence of a music, and he would write the poetry of the Psalms to the cadence of that music. We talk about David in this way, but if you were actually to open up the Bible, there's an entirely different understanding of who King David was. Okay? Let's put that in a box. We're going to come back to that. Now let's talk about Don Corleone for a minute. So who is Don Corleone? He was, well, all right, so Don Corleone is the head of the Corleone family. He was a scion of an olive oil empire in, I believe it was Sicily. He comes to the United States. He makes a name for himself, a penchant of violence, but he brings order to the new immigrant Italian community, and he's able to hold on to that order, law and order in his mind, because he becomes the sanctified godfather of the children of this community. Right? And as I said on Tuesday night, and why we're teaching this, is that when Mario Puzo wrote the first Godfather story, the book, at the end of his career, he was interviewed about his inspiration for the book. He said, look, I was inspired by my Italian heritage. I was inspired by the sort of legacy of the mythos of the mafia, but I was also inspired by the King David and King Solomon stories in the Bible. And that when he wrote the book, he wrote it with a few vignettes that were some cases loosely based and some cases not so loosely based on King David, King Solomon stories. And so I think it's important then, if that's the case, to take one of the most amazing pieces of American cinematography and see what the Bible has to do with Don and Michael Corleone. So let's just review the story very quickly for those of you who didn't sit through the 3-hour movie on Tuesday night. Okay? The first major part of the movie, in fact, the whole, I guess if it's 3 hours, the whole first 35 to 40 minutes takes place on one day. It's the wedding of Connie's wedding, right? His daughter's wedding, right? And during the Tish and during the Bedekin, instead of being there with the bride and the groom and celebrating, he's in his office entertaining guests, right? Now, what is he doing? There's a special kind of idea that on the day of my daughter's wedding, the Godfather can't refuse a request by any of his, should we say, loyal subjects, right? Now, as I pointed it out on Tuesday night, but I have to point it out again. The opening scene, the first 10 minutes of the movie, is like watching a religious experience. You hear the music, it goes completely dark, and then Bonacera, he's the, what's his job again? He's the undertaker, thank you. He's an undertaker. He starts talking, weeping. In the beginning of the movie, he's weeping and talking about his daughter, who he wanted to raise to be an American, and let her have American values, and then she got into a crowd with some boys, and those boys took her out and made her drink whiskey, and they tried to rape her, and she refused to be raped by them, but they beat her up, and now she's in the hospital. And what did Bonacera do, as any good American should do? He went to the police. And it just, again, if you saw this, I said this on Tuesday night, but for those who weren't there, the screen begins to open up, and the first thing you see after Bonacera's face is a profile and a shoulder and a hand. And you don't know at first if it's a policeman or a politician or a priest. The way that it's lit, it looks like he's confessing to a priest. And what's the first thing Don Corleone says to Bonacera? How come you didn't come to me first? How come you went to the police? I'm so offended. You never had me over for a cup of coffee. You've never wanted my friendship. I'm the godfather to your son. My wife is the godmother to your daughter, the one who's got beaten up. How come you didn't come to me first? What Coppola does in that is similar to the opening scenes of the book, is that he takes the figure of the Godfather and elevates him to almost religious stature. I mean, it's just amazing, right? The other religious moment in the book, and then there's the wedding and all of that, right? And even, so they do the nuptials, right? He breaks the glass, they say Mazel Tov, they go off to start dancing, and where does Don Corleone go to? Back into his office again to do more of the work that he needs to do, right? Which we'll get back to in a second. The last scene in the book, in the movie, Corleone is already dead, okay? Michael is there, and he has been asked to become the godfather to his niece, right? Connie's daughter, right? And they're in the church. Also very much a religious scene, right? There's the priest who's now speaking in Latin or Italian, and there's the baptismal font, and they're standing there, and they're doing the rites of the baptism, the transformation of bringing this child into the church, confirming and beginning their Catholic journey, right? A true baptism. And what is that cut against? All the 5 different murders happening simultaneously across the city, right? It's, again, Coppola using this amazing justice, what made him Francis Ford Coppola, right? With religious music playing over the top of it. You have the baptism of the daughter, and you have the baptism of the new Godfather, one through water and one through blood. And it's a religious scene. And that's how the movie ends, more or less, right? The very last scene, of course, is when he's sitting in the office, Dad's office, and he has the ring on, the door closes, right? And the consigliaries are now kissing his ring because he has now been anointed the new Godfather. He becomes, well, not exactly. Not exactly. But yes, I understand what you're saying. He becomes kind of like his father. Okay. All right, so here we have these 2 amazing pieces of literature. So what I think we should do is talk about 3 vignettes that I think exhibit how these characters kind of overlap with each other. And I actually queued up the first one. I'm not sure it's going to work right, so let's try it. If it doesn't work after a minute, I'll just turn it off and explain to you the story, and then we'll go into the text study. So maybe, Luis, you want to help me here? If you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about when you see it. No, it's going to take. Sorry, this was going to be really nice to show you. Back to the Connie's wedding. It's Connie's wedding, right? He's introducing all these people, right? So Bonacera comes in, right? And then all of a sudden this big movie star comes in. His name is Johnny Fontaine. Okay, Johnny Fontaine is the assimilated kid out of the whole crew, right? His name is Johnny Fontaine. His name isn't overtly Italian. He's wearing a white tux that is made of linen. It's so cool looking. He's got a smooth voice. All the ladies love him. He is, believe it or not, he's right, exactly, the Frank Sinatra type character, and he is, Don Corleone is his godfather, right? Now, the scene is really powerful because the way that they tell it. So, Johnny Fontaine's out there doing a song at the reception, right? Then Michael is sitting there, just back from the war. He's wearing his uniform, and he's talking about Johnny when he was a young kid. And he turns to this girl who later becomes his wife, and he says, let me tell you a story about Johnny and my father. This is where you begin to learn about the father. What happens is that Johnny wanted a part in a little movie, just getting his career started, right? And the guy didn't want to, he wanted a part in a band. That's right. Sorry, better to watch it. You saw the movie more recently than me. Okay, so he wanted a part in a band, and then he wanted out of the band, because he was his kind of acting career. And the band leader wasn't going to let him out of the band. He says, you know what, you can buy him for me for like $10,000. Means like you buy out his contract or whatever for $10,000. So Don Corleone sends a couple of consigliaries over and makes the band leader an offer he can't refuse. So much so that he lets Johnny Fontaine out of the band with a certified check for $1,000 back to the family for their trouble. Right? And they asked Michael, like, what's that all about? Because he's only being kind of alluding to what's happening. He says, well, my father made him an offer he can't refuse, which is a euphemism in the movie, right? It comes up about 10 times in the movie. Fast forward, Connie's wedding, Johnny comes in, and Johnny goes and sits with his godfather and starts crying. He's like, my voice, it doesn't work so well. I'm falling apart. My career is over. But there's this movie. This guy named Waltz. If you just go there, go to California, and convince him to let me be in my movie, I'll be back on top again. The first thing that Don Corleone does is picks him up and like slaps him around a little bit and says, "Be a man. Don't cry about it." But then he goes to his other son, and he says, "Go to California," and he meets with Waltz, and Waltz completely shuts this guy down, right? He doesn't know that he's Don Corleone's son. He goes and he yells at him. He kicks him out of the studio. Then he finds out the next day that it's Don Corleone's son. He has him over to his nice palazzo on the hills of Beverly Hills, right? And he shows him around his wealth. He gives him a nice dinner, explains to him very kindly that he is a good man, but he's not going to be pushed around by the Godfather. And he says, okay, I need to go to the airport right now because the Don doesn't like waiting to hear bad news. Right? And the very next scene, the most famous scene in the movie, right? Waltz wakes up, beautiful scene, panning over his beautiful property up to his bedroom. The sun is breaking. It's a beautiful scene. He wakes up, and who is in bed with him? The head of the horse. Okay. That's right, a $600,000 horse. So, why am I talking about this scene? And what does this have to do with the book? And what does it have to do with the Tanakh? Is that to be a mafioso means that you have to both be elevated in this leadership character, but you also have to be completely willing on a dime to use unimaginable violence to get what you want. Unimaginable violence. And David does the same thing, which is why we're going to begin by looking at 1 Samuel chapter 25. Okay? So Samuel dies, which is really important actually for this story, because Samuel dies because he is the conscience of David. Samuel was the prophet who chose King Saul, and then later chose King David, and then he dies, and David gets a little lost for a while. Okay? So Samuel died, and all the Israelites were gathered together and lamented him and buried him in the house at Ramah. Not in Ojai, by the way, just a different place called Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. He's down in the south, in the desert. And there was a man named Maon, whose possessions were in Carmel. So he lived in the south, but he had possessions up north. And the man was very wealthy. And he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and was shearing his sheep in Carmel. He was on a festival to shear his own sheep. And the name of the man in Carmel, his name was Nabal, and the name of his wife was Abigail or Abigail. And she was a woman of good understanding, which comes to be very important in a minute, and beautiful countenance. So she was smart, she was beautiful, right? But the man was churlish and evil in his doings, and he was of the house of Caleb. And David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. And David sent out 10 young men, and David said to the young men, go, I can't do the Marlon Brando voice. If someone wants to do it, go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name. Okay? And thus shall you say to him, peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. And now I've heard that you have shearers, and now your shepherds are here with us. We hurt them not, nor are we anything missing to them, all the while they were in Carmel. Go over there and say, as long as when you're in Carmel, I heard that you have lots of sheep. I heard that you're shearing sheep. I want you to know we're not going to hurt your sheep. And that we know you have the sheep, and we know that you have lots of money, but we're doing nothing to hurt you. Which is like mafiosos speak for, there's a reason why we're not going to hurt you, and that's if you, pay up, right? Ask your young men, and they will tell you, therefore let the young men find favor in your eyes, for we have come in a festive day. It's a festival day. There's nothing going to go wrong here, right? Give, I beg you, whatever your generosity permits you to my servants, and to David your son. And when David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal according to all those words in the name of David, and they waited. So here they are. They show up at Nabal's sheep shearing shop, and they said, "We work for David. Now, we love what you do. You seem like you're very successful. You can do what you want to do, but maybe you want to consider giving a gift to David. I don't know. Maybe, and we'll just wait outside right here as you'd make a decision about what you want to do." And Nabal answered David's servants and said, "Who's David? Who's this guy? And who is this son of Jesse? Who is this guy? There are many servants nowadays who break away, and every man for his own master. Shall I then take my bread and water and the fresh meat I have killed for my shearers and give it to men whom I know where they're not from?" So David's young men turned away, went back, and came and told David all that happened. Right? Can you imagine Waltz talking to Don Corleone's son saying, "Who is he? He's in New York. I'm in California. Do you know who I am? I'm the most powerful movie producer in the entire world. There are people all over the world that want to be in my pictures. Do you think I'm going to put Johnny Fontaine in my pictures? Get out of here," right? So they said, "All right, you know what? Don Corleone needs to hear this right away. We're going to go right back home." And David then says to his men, "Gird you on every man his sword," and they girded on man his sword, and David also girded on his sword, and they went up after David about 400 men. That's a nice posse. And 200 remained with the baggage. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, "Behold, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he's rallied against them. You might want to consider they're coming in those big black town cars. You might want to consider maybe readjusting. He's going to make you an offer you can't refuse." But then the men were very good to us, and they were not harmed, nor did we miss anything as long as we went with them, and we went in the fields. They were all a wall about us night and day, and while we were there with them keeping the sheep, and therefore now, and consider what you will do, for evil is intended against our master and against all his household, for he is such a worthless man that no man can speak to him. Here, the Nabal's guys are saying, "We're strong men, but our guy, I think David's more powerful. I think he's not such a good guy. Maybe we should let you in the back door." Then Abigail comes out. Okay? Remember, what did the Torah say or the Tanakh say about Abigail? What's the first thing they said about her? She's smart. She's a smart goyel, right? Abigail hurled and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine, and 5 sheets ready prepared, and 5 measures of parched grain, and 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and laid them all on asses. And she said to her servants, "Go on before me, behold, I come after you." But she told not her husband Nabal. And it was also as she rode out on the ass that she came down under the cover of the hill, and behold, David and his men came down after her, and she met them. And David had said, "Surely in vain have I kept all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed and all that belonged to him, and he was required me evil for good." He's talking to the wife and saying, "How come you never had me over for a cup of coffee? How come now you never wanted my friendship? Surely we're here to do good, and here you're coming to do evil," right? I mean, this is classic Don Corleone kind of language. "God, do that and more also to the enemies of David, if I leave all that belongs to him by the morning light, and who pisses against the wall." Right? So now I'm going to come to you and come to your house, and since you turned my men away, I'm going to completely destroy your house. That's just the way it is. Because God is the one who's behind me, right? So how do we know that Abigail is so smart? And when Abigail saw David, she hurried, she got off her donkey, and she fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground, and fell at his feet and said, "On me, my lord, on me let this iniquity be, and let your maidservant, I beg you, speak to your ears and hear the words of your maidservant. Let not my lord, I beg you, regard this worthless man Nabal." This is her husband she's talking about, okay? "For as his name is, so is he." Nabal. Nabal, by the way, means what in Hebrew? A bad person, right? It means a bad person. It means sort of like trashy, like he's not a good guy, okay? "Is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your maidservant, saw not what the young men of my lord whom you sent. And therefore, my lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, seeing the Lord has restrained you from coming to shed blood, and from avenging yourself with your own hand, now let your enemies and those who seek evil to my lord be as Nabal. And now this blessing which your maidservant has brought my lord, let it be given to the young men who follow my lord. I beg you, forgive the trespass of your maidservant, for the Lord will certainly make my lord make my lord as sure as your house, because my lord fights the battles of the Lord, and evil has not been found in all your days. If men rise up to pursue you and to seek your soul, the soul of my lord shall be bound in the bundle of life with the Lord your God. And the souls of your enemies he shall sling out, as from the hollow of the sling. And it shall come to pass, when the Lord shall have done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and shall have appointed you a ruler over Israel. So what's she saying to him? What's she saying to him? Take all this food, take everything, right? Not you're the real person, not my little schlubby husband over here, right? So here's my question. Do you think she's trying to save her husband? Yeah. Do you think she's trying to save herself? Okay. So it's funny because the Torah says she's really smart. And the question for me is, okay, there's really smart, like kind and all of that, but there's also smart where she's shrewd. And is she being shrewd to save herself or to save her husband? Is she being kind and smart or not kind and smart? I don't know. Her bet, if you think she's trying to save her husband, her bet is to lay him to waste so that maybe David would have mercy on a husband. Is that how a mafioso works, though? Does a mafioso have mercy upon those who've slighted his honor? Not really, right. And David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord God." I mean, this is amazing. "Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, who sent you to meet this day to meet me. And blessed is your discretion. And blessed are you who have kept me this day from coming to shed blood and from avenging myself at my own hand." So he first tells her, don't worry. We're not going to do anything to your husband. Thank you for the gifts. You've stayed my hand. "For in every deed, as the Lord God Israel lives, who has kept me back from hurting you, if you had not hurried and come to meet me, surely there have not been left in Naval by the morning light any who pisses against the wall." So David, meaning men, right? So David received from her hand that which she brought him, and said to her, "Go up in peace to your house. I have listened to your voice and have granted your request." And Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he held a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry with him. Why is he so happy? He's drunk, well, because he also thinks he outsmarted the Don, right? He outsmarted David. So he's got this big feast. Now, we know from the movie what happens when the bad guys have big feasts. What ends up happening usually? They end up all getting murdered in one way or another. It's very similar. For he becomes very drunk. And therefore she told him nothing, less or more, until the morning light. But it came to pass in the morning, when the wine was gone out of Nabal, and his wife told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. And it came to pass about 10 days after, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. So if David can't do it himself, he's got God on his back to do his dirty work for him. And when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be the Lord, who has pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal, and has kept his servant from evil, for the Lord has returned the wickedness of all upon his own head." And David sent and talked with Abigail to take him for a wife. And when the servants of David came to Abigail to Carmel, they spoke to her, saying, "David has sent us to you to take him for you to take him as a wife." And she arose, bowed herself on her face to the earth, and said, "Behold, let your maidservant be a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my lord." And Abigail hurried and arose and rode upon her ass with her 5 maids, and went after her, and he went after the messengers of David and became his wives. And David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel. Both of them became his wives. And Saul had also given him Michal to David's wife, and Palti the son of Lachish, who was also of Galim. So, how did David make off in this whole situation? Yeah, I think he did okay. I think he did okay, right? He went to Nabal and said, essentially, "I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. You either come," right? He sends the people ahead. That person rebukes his messengers. So he comes back with the sword and basically threatens to kill him. And only Abigail's smartness saves the household, only then for God, essentially, to take his life a couple days later. And then what happens to Abigail? Right, she's riding off on the donkey into, Never Never Land. Like, she's like, "Yeah, I made it out, all right. I'm now going to become the wife of Don Corleone. So, and how does this... David's not king yet, by the way. This is the most amazing part, is that he's on the run. King Saul is still king. He got bandits. He's got 400 men with him, right? He's a gangster. He's a warlord. He's not a king. What did he want from Nabal? He wanted tribute. He wanted protection money, right? It would be a shame if these sheep should die tomorrow. It would be a real shame if you were to lose, all your men tomorrow, right? It's amazing how King David, similar to Don Corleone, has this a sort of elevated character in our mind, but was willing to turn on a dime to commit utter atrocities in the name of his cause, in the name of his serving his power. Any comments on this particular story? Now, you see, the Johnny Fontaine story is just a stand-in. It's not literal. We'll get to the literal one at the end. This isn't literal with Johnny Fontaine, but you see how Don Corleone sends his son to go talk to the most powerful movie producer in California, and when that movie producer rebukes his servant, the next thing that happens is they go and they take his livelihood. It wasn't a sheep, it was a horse. Right? It wasn't his thousands of sheep, it was his $600,000 horse. A very expensive horse, right? And what happened in the end? Johnny Fontaine gets the part in the movie. How do we know that? Because like a few scenes later, there's a big bouquet that shows up and says, "This is from Johnny. He gave it to you because he got the part in the movie." Right? No, he's like, I'm over it. Exactly right. Okay. Perhaps the most disturbing relationship it's hard to say the most disturbing relationship in this movie, but the one that I think pulls at our heartstrings the most is between Carlo and Connie. Right? Carlo and Connie are married in the first act of the movie. Carlo's not exactly a good husband. Okay? He sleeps around and he beats her up a lot. And this idea that there is a member of the family, inside the family, that essentially takes advantage of another member of the family physically is also known in the Bible and known in the King David stories. David had a number of sons. So if you fast forward, now David is king. He has a number of sons. He's succeeded in his power. He has all these wives. His sons, the three most important sons that he has for our tradition are Amnon, Absalom or Avshalom, and Solomon, right? So, and he had a daughter whose name is Tamar. Yeah. And Michal is his wife. Meirav and Michal are both his wives. So they have a daughter named Tamar, right? The relationship between, and so the relationship between Amnon and Tamar is also not a good one, right? I don't know if this is where it's really appropriate for little kids, just letting you know. And that's 2 Samuel chapter 13, okay? Amnon's kind of like the Fredo of the family. He's not exactly the most put-together guy. He wants to be part of the family, but he knows he's not the one who's necessarily in line for succession to the throne. And he also has a passion. He's very attracted to his sister, half-sister, whose name is Tamar. Okay? So, and it came to pass, now we're in the story here, okay? And it came to pass after this that Avshalom, the son of David, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. By the way, if your name is Tamar, it's not a great name to have in the Torah, in the Tanakh, because both Tamars in the book, terrible things happened to them. And so, if you know the Tamar story from the book of Genesis, and you start reading this, it should automatically trigger in you, if you know your stories, trigger in you something, because you know that the name Tamar is a callback to Yehuda and Tamar, and what happens to her, and with her husband, who is Judah's son, and his brothers, they all die. And she ends up trying to be a part of the family, but all the brothers die in that story. And so this Tamar, it takes that story and makes it even darker and scarier, because it's not the brothers who die, it's the brother who rapes her. And that is considered just as bad. Okay? So Amnon, the son of David, loved her. And Amnon was so tormented that he fell sick for his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and Amnon thought it was hard for him to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jehonadab, and the son of Shimeah, David's brother, and Jehonadab was a very cunning man. And he said to him, "Why are you, being the king's son, so wasted from day to day? Will you not tell me?" And Amnon said to him, "I love Tamar, my brother's Avshalom's sister." And Jehonadab said to him, "Lay down on your bed and make yourself sick. And when your father comes to see you, say to him, I pray, let my sister Tamar come and give me bread and prepare food in my sight, and I may see it and eat of her hand." Okay, I think you know where this is going. So Amnon lay down and feigned to be sick, and when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, "I beg you, let Tamar my sister come and make me a couple of cakes in my sight, that I may eat of her hand." Then David sent home Tamar, saying, "Go now to your brother Amnon's house and prepare him food." So Tamar went to her brother's house, and he lay down, and she took flour, kneaded it, and made cakes in his sight, and baked the cakes. And she took a pan and poured them out before him, and he refused to eat. And Amnon said, "Send out all the men from me." And they went out, every man from him. And Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food into my chamber, that I may eat of your hand." And Tamar took the cakes which she made and brought them into the chamber and to Amnon her brother. Notice how the text is very clear. Amnon is her brother. Even though it's her half-brother, they're trying to make it very clear that this is not a good relationship. Okay? And when she had brought them to eat, for him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, "Come lie with me, my sister." And she answered him, "No, my brother, do not force me, for such a thing ought not to be done in Israel. Do not do this shameful deed. And I, where shall I carry my shame?" You remember the Tamar story from the Tanakh, from the Torah. Tamar said something very similar, not about this situation, but that she was carrying shame because none of the brothers would marry her, which was part of the marriage law. Right? So here they take the story in Acts. It's very interesting. I mean, I could teach a whole class just on this one line. The Tamar of Genesis wanted to sleep with the brother of her husband who had died because she wanted to remove the shame from her name. Because Levirate marriage insisted that when a brother dies, the younger brother takes the wife so that they would still be in the house. She wanted to remove her shame. Here, the exact opposite is the case. It's a literary flip. The exact opposite is the case. Don't sleep with my brother's brother, because if you do, then I will carry shame. Okay? It's interesting how they use sexual relationship and what that has to do with shame. It's a whole class we can teach on it, but don't have time for that now. "And as for you, you shall be as one of the base men in Israel. And therefore I beg you, speak to the king, for he would not withhold me from you. But he would not listen to her advice, and being stronger than he, forced her and lay with her." Okay? And then Amnon hated her very much. Crazy psychology, right? Desired her so much, raped her, and then hated her right away. So that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Get up and get out of here, be gone." And she said to him, "Don't add this greater wrong of sending me away to the other that you did to me." But he would not listen to her. Then he called his servant who ministered to him and said, "Take now this woman away from me and bolt the door after her, lock her out." And she had a long sleeve rope upon her, for which the robes were the king's daughters, were very virgins were dressed, and the servant took her out and bolted the door after her. And Tamar put ashes on her head and tore her long sleeve rope, because she's no longer a virgin, that was on her, and laid her hand on her head, crying aloud as she went. I mean, the Tanakh spares no words in trying to describe what a deep sin and shameful place Amnon has put Tamar. Now let's go back Shelley. Please, we have to be really loud, okay? You have to speak really loud.
Notice there's a couple of points when she's talking. She says this thing is not done in Israel.
Yep.
Not done in Israel. Not done in Israel. So this is a rather uniquely Jewish thing to respect the virtue of another woman.
That's good, right. I think that's true. She was also trying to appeal to his national identity as a prince of the sovereign king, right? Mm-hmm. This is not done in our nation. You represent our nation. This is not done in our nation. It's not just a religious statement. It's a nationalistic statement, knowing who is the person that's trying to rape her, right?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Any other comments on that? Because, I could teach this in a much more expanded way, but because of timing, I want to get to the last story. I'm just showing you where Mario Puzo might have gotten some of his ideas. Okay, so Connie and Carlo don't have the greatest relationship. There's such a haunting scene where he ends up in the bathroom with her, if you remember that scene where he takes out the belt and ends up, and you don't see what happens, but you know it's terrible, right? Now, Connie has a brother, right? Remember, Carlo is not a Corleone. He's a son-in-law. Connie has a brother. What is his brother's name? Sonny. Yeah. You remember what happens? Sonny figures out what's going on and wants to come after Carlo. This is where Mario Puzo is different than the Torah. What happens to Sonny? Yeah, he's machine gunned down at a toll booth somewhere in New Jersey, I think, right? Oh, yeah, that's right. Sonny beat up Carlo on the street. Right, so Sonny, right. So Tamar has a brother who's part of the family. His name is Avshalom. Okay? So go down a little bit, okay? Maybe like verse 23. And it came to pass after 2 full years that Avshalom had sheep shearers in Baal Chazor. Do you see where I am? On page 4. Page 4, verse 23. I'm just skipping a little bit. Basically what happens is King David hears about it and wants to do something about it but isn't sure what to do. He becomes angry and says, just hold on, wait for your opportunity. Right? Wait for your opportunity. So Avshalom is now coming up in the world. He has his own sheep. A lot of things happen, I guess, around sheep shearing in the Torah. I guess, it's the thing that happens, right? And behold, your servant has sheep shearers. Let the king, I beseech you, and his servants go with your servant. And the king said to Avshalom, no, my son, let us not all go now, lest we should be a burden to you. And he pressed him, but he would not go. And he blessed him. And then Avshalom said, if not, I beg you, let my brother Amnon go with us. And the king said to him, why should he go with you? Don't you think David knows what's in Avshalom's heart, right? It's like saying, Avshalom wants everyone to come to the sheep shearing festival, and David's saying, I don't think that's such a good idea. Maybe the whole family shouldn't get together. And Avshalom's like, you're right. How about just Amnon comes with me? David's like, why is that? Why would you want that? But Avshalom pressed him. Then he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. And Avshalom was commanded his servants, saying, mark now, when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, strike Amnon, then kill him, fear not, have I not commanded you? Be courageous and be brave. And the servants of Avshalom did to Amnon as Avshalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, every man rode on his mule and fled. And it came to pass, while they were in the way, that the news came to David, saying, Avshalom has killed all the king's sons, and there is not one of them left. Then the king arose and tore his garments and lay on the earth, and all his servants stood with their clothes torn. And Yehonaav, remember him? This Amnon's buddy? The son of Shimea, David's brother, answered and said, let not my lord suppose that they have killed all the young men with the king's sons, for only Amnon is dead. For by the command of Avshalom, this has been ordained from the day that he raped his sister Tamar. Okay? I'll just leave the rest of the story there. Okay, so Avshalom ends up killing Amnon because Avshalom's sister was raped or beaten, in the case of the story of Mario Puzo, by Amnon or Carlo. Okay? So again, this is not as literal as the last one we're going to look at, but do you see this storyline takes place in some way inside the Godfather movie? Right, exactly. So what she's saying is it's actually more parallel if you string it out and say, okay, first they beat him and then Sonny dies, but then at the end of the movie, Carlo ends up getting killed by the end of the movie too, right? And what did Michael say to Fredo? Remember what Michael said to Fredo? It just sort of applies to the whole thing, right? You can have your own opinions, but you should never take a stance against the family. Right? That's when he's arguing about Mo Green in Las Vegas, but really it's Michael's starting to really come into his own as owning this family, right? Right, exactly. His father said the same. All right, so now I want to go to the last vignette, We'll call that a night at the end of this. This last vignette is the story on which Mario Puzo based the Godfather story, okay? I'm fine. I'm actually fine. It's the end of Don Corleone's life. He's been through a lot, and he's asked Michael to come over for brunch. And they sit outside and they have a sherry or something, right? And what does Don Corleone say to Michael? He says, I've tried to live a good life, right? This is sort of his personal confession, right? It mirrors the confession in the beginning of the movie that Bonacera is trying to give. He's kind of laying it all out for Michael, right? I've tried to live a good life. I've tried to be a good father, a grandfather, godfather to these people. I've tried to be around, right? I've made some friends and I've made some enemies. I'm going to give you a list of people that I have made promises to and that we are in our debt. And he begins naming off the names of different families, right? Try to keep this together. Try to keep everyone together, right? Then he says to Michael, I'm going to die soon. I want you to know that all of those debts that I owe need to be paid after my death. All the things that we have agreed to, all the people that we've agreed to protect, even though they've wronged us, we've agreed to protect them. It's true as long as I'm alive. My death is coming soon. You know what to do after I die. Which sets up the last act of the movie. Right? Sets up the last act of the movie. That scene is taken nearly verbatim from 1 Kings chapter 2, which is a haftarah that we read. Can you believe this? We read this as a haftarah on Saturday morning. All right, so you have to read this, right? So we'll read some of this, okay? David is now old. He's at the end of his life. 1 Kings chapter 2, he doesn't live past this chapter, okay? After all the fighting, after all the rebellions, after everything that happens in his own family, he survived it all, and he's got one son left whose name is Solomon. Solomon came up in the world. By the way, he came up because the world by the woman that he committed adultery with, right? Now, the child of that relationship died. So Bathsheba had Solomon after they got married, after David offed Uriah the Hittite. You remember him, right? So David brought Bathsheba. He seems to be collecting wives by killing men. Like that just seems to be a theme that happens in King David's life. So now David is old. They say he's so old that they bring a young woman in to try to warm his bed, and it doesn't work, which is a nice euphemism for being an old man. And now he brings Solomon in to his chamber, and this is what he says, okay? And the days of David drew near that he should die, and he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth. Be you strong, therefore, and show yourself a man, and keep the charge of your Lord God, and walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, commandments, and his judgments, and his testimonies, as it is written in the Torah of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do, and whenever you turn yourself. That's really nice, right? That's good, sagely advice, right? That the Lord may continue his word, which he has spoke concerning me, saying, if your children take heed to their way, to walk before me in truth, with all their heart and with all their soul, there shall not fail you. And he said, a man on the throne. He set a man on the throne of Israel. This is really lofty, beautiful language, right? It sounds like Moses, right? In fact, this week's Torah portion says 3 different times, walk in the way of the Lord, you may prosper and live. This is what God wants for you, is to be humble and to walk in the way of the Lord. Follow God's commandments and you will prosper and you'll be good, right? And he says, and he said, a man on the throne of Israel. That's this guy, right? Me, right? And also, you should know what Yoav, the son of Zeruiah, did to me, and what he did to the 2 captains of the armies of Israel, to Avner, the son of Ner, and to Amasa, the son of Jeter, whom he killed, and shed blood of war during peacetime, and put the blood of war upon his girdle, around his loins, and in his shoes that were on his feet. Do therefore according to your own wisdom, and let not his gray head go down to Sheol in peace. But show kindness to the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite, and let them be of those who eat of your table. For so they came to me when I fled because of Avshalom your brother. And behold, you shall have with you Shmei the son of Gera the Benjamite of Bachrum, who cursed me with a grievous curse in the day when I went to Manchanim. But he came down to meet me at the Jordan, and I swore to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put you to death with the sword. And therefore hold him not guiltless, for you are a wise man, and know what you ought to do to him. But his gray head bring down to Sheol with blood. And David slept with his fathers, and was buried in the city of David. And the days that David reigned over Israel were 40 years. 7 years he reigned in Hebron, 30 years and he reigned in Jerusalem. And Solomon sat on the throne of David, his father, and his kingdom was firmly established. And Adoniah, the son of Chagit, came to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, and said, do you come peacefully? And he said, peacefully. Okay. So what does David? He gives his son Solomon 3 pieces of advice. 4, I guess. He says, first, be a good man. Follow in the ways of our people. Don't forget about the family. And I've lived a fortunate life. I'm a powerful man. God set a man on the throne of Israel. The second thing that he said is, but, remember Yoav? Remember Yoav and what he did? I promised I would never pursue him as long as I was alive. Now, I know you're a wise man, and you know what to do. Don't let him go down to his grave with gray hair. But this other guy, he showed kindness to me. He showed kindness to me. You should let him eat at our table. You should be kind to him. But this third guy tricked me and cursed me. And I promised him that even though he got the better of me, I'd never harm him as long as I was alive. But you're a wise man, and you know what you're going to do. It's exactly what Don Corleone says to Michael, right? And what's Michael's first major move as the new Godfather? He kills all these people. He kills all the people that are rising up against Don Corleone. What do you think Solomon's first move is? He kills all the people that David has asked him to. I don't even know if did I include it. Let me see if I included it. Oh, yeah. On the next page, he goes up. I don't even have to read it. He basically goes and he finds ways of killing all of the enemies of King David to solidify his own power. It's this cycle, this story that Mario Puzo based this section of The Godfather on. So what do we learn? What do we learn about this? What do we learn about this? To be a king of Israel, you have to be a mafioso? I don't know. Maybe the other way around. We learn that great literature, in my opinion, great literature, right, repeats itself. Maybe not word for word, but it's like a spiral. It's sort of like a rhymes, basically. And that the stories that we love and care for and cherish and treat as sacred have inspired us through generations and have inspired artists through the generations to create great narratives. And how do we know that a narrative is great? Because if we keep repeating it, because if it's a piece of literature that speaks to some of our greatest desires, our aspirations to be good people, our aspirations to care for family and country, our aspirations to care for ourselves, our aspirations to care for a greater world, but they also touch on our base desires. There isn't a single character in the entire Tanakh that we venerate that doesn't have some kind of flaw. Right? Abraham, the father of our entire tradition according to Judaism, tried to murder his son and never talked to his wife about it. And in the end of days, his son ran away from him. They never talked again. And when he gets home, his wife had died of heartache. That's Abraham. Isaac, God bless him, had PTSD his entire life and basically never did anything on his own. Everything he did was the exact same thing that his father did, including digging the same exact wells that his father dug. And he could never really made it work. He wasn't exactly a leader. So much so that he even allowed his young sons to take advantage of him by tricking him. Jacob was a trickster. In many ways, he was a charlatan. And he was able to be on the run and to trick not only his father, but trick his father-in-law twice, and 3 times really, if you think about the sheep, and trick Pharaoh. And only then was he able to sort of confront things at the end of his life. Not exactly the best guy. Moses grew up, he was born into slavery, but grew up in privilege. The first major thing he does in the world is he murders someone. Right, he killed the Egyptian. Then he runs away. God says, hey, go back to Egypt. And he says, no, I kind of like it here in the suburbs. I've got a house. I got a wife. I've got land. I got a Range Rover. It's great. He doesn't want to go back. God had to convince him to go back. And then halfway through the Exodus, he's ready to give up. Right? Not exactly the hero, right? Many of these characters, they're special in their own way, but they're not any more special necessarily than you or me. And what makes this literature sacred is that despite their flaws, or in spite of their flaws, we look for the best parts of them. And we read the stories, and we try to find ourselves in them, and try to find them in us. And it's not just us who do it. It's great writers, great thinkers of all traditions who look at our sacred works as the trunk line of which literature is based, and the Western culture is based, and ultimately which religion is based. And the process of being a religious human being today, I believe, is to take the good parts of these and to lift them up, and to find new meanings over and over again in our tradition, and to have fun with it too, and to see how Don Corleone can act like King David, and Michael Corleone can act like King Solomon, and just have fun with it too, and kind of laugh at our own tradition at the same time. I hope everyone has a great night, and thank you for coming. You can come up and ask questions at the end if you want.